Now, a Labor Day look at workforce layoffs and their consequences. NewsHour economics correspondent Paul Solman has the story.
Layoffs. Bitter but necessary medicine to keep us competitive in the global economy. At least that's become the conventional wisdom over the years, as millions of Americans have been forced from their jobs. But after covering layoffs for the past few decades, New York Times reporter Lou Uschitel has come to believe the necessary medicine story was one of several key myths.
One myth was that, look, once we get ourselves good and efficient, the layoffs, this terrible period of layoffs will stop, we'll reach a new equilibrium, we'll be again at the top of the world.
What about taking care of the people? What about people's lives here? People have lives here. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go?
We recorded that laid-off worker back in 1996, and he's one of several blasts from the past in this story. Among them, almost a decade later, machinist Ed Landry.
We went to lunch and our jobs went to China.
Is that literally where your job went?
That's right, after 38 years in the same shop. I come out of service, I went to work where I was working, and last September they told us that they decided to buy the product in China instead of having it made here in the United States.
So one myth of layoffs, that they'd stop. In fact, they haven't even slowed down.
The equilibrium we've settled into is the equilibrium of the knee-jerk layoff, if you will.
A second myth, says Lou Uschitel.
In a changing economy, there's plenty of good jobs out there, folks, and all you have to do is be in the right skills. If you're in the wrong skills and you lose your job, we'll train you to be in the right skills. And it's turned out there just aren't enough good jobs at good pay for all the qualified people who want them in this country.
That's another theme we've been hearing for more than a decade.
I've been here 30 years. Where am I going to get a job at 52? McDonald's? Maybe I can get your job. How would you like it if I went do your job?
But the final myth was, to Uschitel, the most disturbing. That in deciding whether and how to lay people off, the economics should be dictated by the costs and benefits to the company alone.
They can make $1 bajillion, but I don't think it should be at the expense of a community.
I put my blood, see it? It's right there. My blood on that job. My machines are stained from blood, okay? And they're going to stay here.
That man was also laid off in 1996, the year Uschitel spearheaded a major New York Times series about so-called corporate downsizing. When the series inspired us to discuss economic insecurity on the NewsHour, the CEO of Sunbeam, Al Dunlap, seemed to some outlandish in defense of layoffs.
I had a corporation where every person stood the chance of losing their job. So I got rid of 35% of the people. But 65% of the people have a more secure future than they've ever had. And we did this without a single labor interruption or a single grievance. We must have been doing something right.
Or something wrong. Dunlap, already known as Chainsaw Al, was later pursued by the SEC for fraud and settled by paying out millions and being banned from corporate America for life. Yet his book back then, Mean Business, became a bestseller. Layoffs, a more and more acceptable way to boost a firm's stock price by making it leaner and meaner. Now, in his new book, The Disposable American, Lou Uschitel argues that this legitimizing of layoffs has come at a devastating cost to workers and American society as a whole.
My book is not about unemployment. It's about the blow, the trauma that people suffer when they're told they don't have value.
The evidence of that trauma comes not only from laid-off workers, it turns out, but those in whom they've confided, like their psychotherapists. How many of you have had a patient or patients who have been laid off, lost their jobs? And that's just virtually everybody here. How many of you have had patients who have been traumatized by that event? The Disposable American was the trigger for this session at the annual meeting of the American Psychoanalytic Association, chaired by psychiatrist Ted Jacobs, on the psychic cost to those laid off.
Depression, severe anxiety, panicky feelings, crises of self-esteem, and regressive behavior are not at all uncommon.
Now, a cynic might argue that these shrinks are themselves in a shrinking profession, so they're projecting their own anxieties onto their patients. But their case history suggested otherwise. People scarred by an economy that now treats layoffs as a get-over-it fact of life.
I cannot underscore the kind of reverberation this had in his life, in his family.
Mark Smaller's talking about a friend, also a therapist, who was counseling laid-off workers when he himself was laid off. He got a better job right away, but
a year ago he called me and said this weird thing had happened, that his boss of the company had called him on a Friday and said, "There's something I need to speak with you about, but it can wait and I'll talk with you on Monday." And the entire weekend he was anxious and couldn't sleep because it had stirred up the whole trauma all over again.
the news is that research now quantifies such traumas for white and blue-collar workers alike. The average layoff, it turns out, takes years off your life.
The facts are that people who become unemployed have a 20% higher mortality rate than others from the same socioeconomic stratum who remain employed.
Please forgive the odd image and sound, but we interviewed British epidemiologist Michael Marmot via the internet from London to avoid blowing a fortune on travel and perhaps risk being laid off ourselves. He's found a higher death rate from layoffs, worse health just worrying about them.
What we've shown is that in the anticipation of layoffs, so people who are working under the cloud of job insecurity have worse health while they're feeling insecure at work.
Marmot's data is backed up by this new Yale study, which found that people laid off after age 50 were twice as likely to suffer a heart attack or stroke in the decade following as those still working, holding all other risk factors constant. And what's driving it? Lack of control over one's life, says Marmot, which actually raises stress hormones.
And one way to deprive people of control over their lives is to take their livelihood away from them, take their job and their livelihood away from them. And lack of control has profound physiological effects.
Lack of control. That's really what it comes down to.
Jim Fusco's father was laid off from his manufacturing job.
It really destroyed him, I think. It really did destroy him. He died of, he died of heart disease. And
at what age?
He was 57.
And you attribute that to his job woes?
Yeah, by just making him, increasing his stress level.
And Fusco himself, a computer consultant, has been laid off twice from AT&T and IBM. The laid off are often pariahs, he says.
I mean, they're treated in a certain way like they're lepers, like they have some kind of disease, like to associate with them is to maybe perhaps bring that same bad luck on yourself.
So layoffs can be hellish, even lethal. But given that global competition has made this a different world, is there anything you can really do about layoffs?
There's no question that there are differences now and that some companies can't employ the number of people that they do. But in most cases, the damage from the layoff is such that you should think twice about getting rid of workers.
To force a second thought, then, you should tell would have the government require companies to report all layoffs, so at least the public would know the true number. He'd also increase government investment to provide good jobs, promote policies to strengthen the labor movement. This is where critics draw the line. Martin Bailey, sitting on the left, one of President Clinton's chief economists, and William Niskanen of the devoutly pro-market Cato Institute. Both acknowledge that layoffs can be devastating.
I think that we have to be very careful, however, about spinning a case for national policy out of being sympathetic with the particular people who are affected by these conditions.
In Europe, they have a labor market where you have a sort of fairly favored group of people whose employment is well protected and whose wages are well protected. The problem is that if it makes it difficult for their companies to restructure and compete in the global labor market, and it means all the people who are not part of this favored elite class of workers are without jobs, and those are the unemployed, those are the people that are rioting in the suburbs of Paris.
So are we then doomed to be uncompetitive unless employers are willing to lay off ruthlessly?
You got to be a land shark to do what they do.
The entire attitude in the workplace is grovel or we'll throw you out the door because there's 20 others waiting to come in.
In the end, it's evidence like this, building up over the years, that led Lou Uschitel to name his book The Disposable American.
And I think we've organized our society now to emphasize this disposability.
It's a disposability that he thinks cheapens us all.